So hello everyone, the expectation is black pieces again. So far we've been doing well with Phillidor and both white systems, Vienna and Botvinnik. There have been a couple of hiccups along the way, but even due to our mistakes, so we are playing black pieces, and if possible we will play Sicilian because the Phillidor is more easier to play against other openings. And white plays c4, so we are forced to play Phillidor's position, because playing c5 would basically mean that we are going to be playing the English opening. So here actually is a chance to play maybe against the Botvinnik system if white is deciding to play e4. However, if we are going to given the opportunity, we are going to play definitely the f5 ourselves. But the question is, do we want to do it straight away, because white will eventually try and jump on d5. But right now it doesn't bother us. We always have this c6 move to support our pawn structure. Bishop g2, and white is playing exactly how I would play the Botvinnik system. But we are doing the Phillidor type of structure with the f5 in the end. Pawn to d3 is a fine move. We don't worry about that. We simply develop our pieces the same way we would develop them in the Phillidor. And we're not going to worry so much about anything in this position. So I've learned my lesson. Every time e4 is played, I will definitely play the Sicilian. So far you know that this is the pawn structure that we want to have in the Phillidor type of structures. Sometimes we like to have obviously the pawn on f7. It depends if we would be playing the Phillidor types of pawn structure against e4. We don't have that much time to play f5. And usually play knight f6 long before we play e5 itself. So now that knight to f3 is played, we can still castle here. We don't have to worry about anything. We are playing opponent that seem to have at least sorted out their opening theory, that they have certain position that they have learned and that they want to play. And I believe it's quite good. It will work against players of their rating. So now that the bishop g5 comes, white might want to jump onto d5. So we will play this typical pawn move in this structure. We will play move c6, so to prevent any jumps of knight here, and also any attack of bishop onto b7. Now if White is basically giving us one of their good bishops. Given the pawn structure, the bishop can move freely around their pawns, and they are giving us the bishop for free without even asking any questions of that bishop. So for us this is a really good moment to... Oh, actually it's my move. Sometimes you might forget on Chessup to make your own move whilst the opponent made their own move. So that may cost as well some time. So we have advantage now of the pair of bishops. So that's one of our first achievements without needing to actually do much or risk much. And white pieces, even though they are well developed, they might be lacking certain bite. For us, it's obviously now important to figure out how to develop our bishop and our knight on the queen side, and I'm not sure yet what kind of position I should be striving for, whether I should try and push for d5 and then e4. However, I feel like development is what should be the most important thing. Sometimes the knight could go to a6 and c5, but white has also quite flexible pawn structure at the moment. And as I'm not quite sure what white wants to do, whether they want to push the e4 pawn, that's why I decide not to move the bishop yet, and I will develop the queen instead. And maybe I will develop the queen onto e7 as to support the pawn to e4 push eventually. Or I can use the idea that is well known from one of the positions where you normally play g6. It's when you play also move f5, and I believe the name of the opening is Leningrad, Dutch Leningrad. So as you can see, sometimes the pawn structures that you may have may resemble some other openings. However, Dutch is being played usually with d4 pawn, so it's just recognizing sometimes the pawn structures and what you can do with your pieces around those pawn structures. So the idea of queen e8 is to bring the queen here and start some sort of attack. Maybe I can play f4 and bishop h3. So that actually looks quite like a nice idea for us to play. So queen e8 I prefer to other developing moves, as these two pieces yet don't have a clear idea where to move these pieces. I don't want to yet make any commitment towards that. Now queen h5 could run potentially to some discoveries with the knight, and I'm not really yet ready to trade our queen. However, if I play queen to h5, there comes knight takes e5, then I have queen takes d1, and there's no jump for the knight to save itself. Move knight d4 does not present any issue, so I can just play queen to h6 and keep on the pressure on the h3 square. So I believe I'm going to try and psych out white. I believe my attack should come on the king side with a move like f4, bishop h3, trading that bishop, and maybe pushing the pawn to f3. So I will definitely put more pressure, bring more pieces to this side of the board. And it looks like our opponent has left the game. It says auto abort in... Oh yeah, it seems like he is back. So the question is, did they start their engine or what happened? We will see. If he got beat by this opponent, then there's something we need to obviously look into later on. So now white wants to free themselves maybe with a move like d4. But I feel we can, first of all, we can totally ignore their idea and maybe start pushing the pawn onto f4 ourselves. We can theoretically move also, so there are two main moves that I'm thinking of. One of them is to push the f4 pawn forward and put lots of pressure against the king, and the other option is to play e4, in which case the knight has to move backwards, and then it's up to us what we going to decide. White might try actually to open the position themselves with the f3. So taking here doesn't make much sense. I feel like investing a pawn into this position might be a good idea. Just simply to play f4, if takes, 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 then we have a really nice pawn structure against our opponent, and we don't have to worry about takes, takes, as this doesn't seem to allow much to white pieces. The problem with f4 is sometimes that we are giving the e4 square for the knight. And we can totally play f4, e4 a little bit later on. But e4 looks like a move that wins us some extra time to make our move. So I believe we are going to play e4, as structurally we can always play move like f4 later on when we need it. Knight moves here. Obviously now our queen is under attack, and the last thing we want to do is to trade the queens when we have a potential attack. So we will drop our queen here. That also prevents temporarily any f3 move, as we would be capturing on e3 with our queen. And we can simply try and build our attack if that's going to be possible. But the position isn't like 100% simple. So white is actually deciding to play f3, but that's simply dropping not one but two pawns. It's actually dropping only one pawn, but probably the very important pawn on e3. So that will weaken their king as well. So the opponent again is disconnected for some reason. We are going to play queen to e3 check. And I wonder where is the opponent going all this time. Seems like he is back again. So I expect move like rook f2 or king h1. Those are the only moves, by the way. So after king h1, we can capture with the bishop on d4. And that looks like a most likely move that we would want to make, as we can possibly win another pawn. We just need to be careful not to grab too much material. But with move like queen takes d4, if there's gonna be any takes on e4, then we can take on c4 in some lines, but right now it's protected by the knight. The question is, do we want to try and trap our queen in the position? Because one idea that I have right now is to try and put pressure on the knight on d2 with the move bishop g5 and try to avoid white taking on e4, at least temporarily. And I don't know if this is a good move or if that's nonsense move, but It would certainly allow us then to take on f3, and as we don't want black to capture with the knight, it might actually improve some of our pieces. And the bishop on g5 is not going to be so bad. So yes, we have so many options, and this is sometimes the problem as well. If you have option like capturing on d4, capturing on f3, capturing with the bishop on d4, then capturing on c3 afterwards, winning another pawn there. So many good moves that we can potentially play. Just not really sure which one would be the best. But I feel like bishop g5 is like one of those moves that puts the pressure on the knight on d2. And if white decides to push the f4 pawn, then we have a pass-protected pawn on e3. And I believe there is no way at the moment to prevent or to have our queen trapped. At least that's what I hope. We have always queen d3 move, we have queen takes d4. We will go back with the bishop. And now if we can keep the pawn on e4, I believe we achieved a potential victory in this game. It certainly locks in this bishop. Rook e1. Maybe white feels that he's trapping our queen, but as we've already established, this is far from truth. We can capture here on d4. Now we have two clean pawns, and this pawn structure looked a lot more like Dutch defense, but to be honest, the way it was played, it was certainly nowhere near Dutch defense. Now we will have to protect this backward pawn from any attacks, potentially prepare the push for d5. Now we don't mind at all to trade the queens at this stage. You can argue that we might be greedy by taking on b2, and certainly that would be the case, but we don't really need to capture on b2. So right now the important bit is to just develop our pieces in a manner that will preserve the advantage. So we don't need to get extra greedy and take on b2. What we need to do is just to protect the central pawn structure and just ride this ship all the way to victory. If I go queen c5, he's got knight to b3, kicking my queen, so I believe my queen should go behind its pawns now that it did a really good job in front of its pawns. And now this pawn will be really torn in his side. The only thing that comes to mind how they can solve this situation is to sacrifice a piece for two pawns, but that would mean we would be a full piece up, and that should conclude game on its own. Once we push the pawn on d5, there's no more chances for white in that department. So it just looks pretty much won. Now what we need to do is just to develop the two remaining pieces on the queen side. So that's our job, and then because white is leading in development, but thanks to the pawn structure, they don't have much of a counterplay to begin with. And I believe if move like g4 comes, then we can already strengthen our center with the move d5 and start pushing forward. So white is attacking us, which is understandable. They give us the pawn in the hopes that knight to b3 is going to... Yeah, but in this case we are just going to grab this pawn. It's a free pawn. Most likely when knight b3 comes, or queen b3 comes with a check, Okay, so in this case we don't have to worry about anything. We just offer our queen for trade. We are also attacking the knight eventually, so, or potentially. If knight c4, that would be a big blunder because we can play bishop e6 already. Trading the queens is already good, very good for us. So we have 3 pawns. One of them you can argue it's a half a pawn. White is now putting some pressure on our pawn, which we wanted to develop the bishop, so we will protect. And now, as you can see, my opponent spent maybe 3 minutes plus the increments, which is 10 seconds. And I spent 11 minutes. And the difference between maybe the time spent and the time normally you should spend more time, as I said in the previous game where it was obvious that my advantage was because my opponent didn't spend enough time for their moves, and therefore it was easy for us to gain advantage just purely because they weren't thinking, and we took the time to prepare our moves. So since our opponent didn't spend enough time thinking, then we now have a position where we don't need to think so much. We just need to protect the pieces that we've already won, and the rest of the game should play itself. So what we are going to do, we can capture on c3, but then it would prevent some of the moves that I want to do later on with the d4. So what I would like to do is to push the d4, but without the knight jumping onto b5. So to achieve this, I will play a6 first, so the knight is not allowed to jump onto a6, and then I should be unstoppable in terms of pushing the pawn to d4. Which I want to do first. As I was saying before, any sacrifices on these pawns will be probably hopeless. In this case, I decided maybe I can actually grab the extra pawn. I can actually grab the extra pawn here and then take on c3 as I wanted to originally. But then again, is there any point in me getting greedy? I will just keep this pawn structure as strong as possible. When you are winning, there's no reason for you to be getting greedy all of a sudden. As the greed could be your downfall. Here opening the g file doesn't matter so much because you can play king f7 and oppose the g file yourself. Also, by not taking here, I'm preventing any possible sacrifices on e4 for the minute. We prefer to keep the pair of bishops still, so we will play bishop g7. If h4, h5, we can still ignore this pretty much. Our job is to gain more strength in the center. White plays rook d1, sorry, which doesn't change anything for us. We will play d4. The knight has to move. The nice thing is that if the knight moves here, we can play knight here, and then the knight is essentially trapped on a4. So that's exactly what happened. Then again, like in the previous game that we played, White did something similar here, and he played knight g4, the knight was trapped going backwards. So here, if we play knight e7, you can see that the knight takes the only active square for the knight that's available, and these pawns are already restricting the knight plenty. So if you play knight to d7, we take in that square, and now the white is more or less forced to play move b3, and we are threatening now b5 to win the knight. So white has seen what is to come, but we have another trick how to keep this line protected, you know, so take even this square away from the knight, and this would be a move d3. So now white doesn't really have escape square for the knight, and the b5 is a big threat. If we forget that the bishop is really fighting nicely this rook here. White plays knight to c4, which is a fine move, but this essentially wins us the knight on a4. I can poke both of these knights with the b5, win one of them, but actually they are supporting each other to go to b6, so b5 would be a mistake. So what we can do, we can just simply grab one knight. After white recaptures, we will push b5 and win the other knight. We don't care about taking the rook, because that would be winning us 2 pawns, whilst capturing the whole knight is gonna win us probably one, also two points, but the entire piece, and piece is always more than 2 points of material. So white is removing the danger to their knight, but we renew the danger with the taking back. We have 2 minutes and 19 seconds, but that's plenty to win the game, even if, you know, and these 2 pawns on its own, they should be the ones to win the game. Sometimes you need to watch over, let's say this rook wasn't here, you need to watch over some sacrifice, like rook takes d3, bishop takes a8 after we recapture. So those are like a little tactics that might be available in some positions, but here it just simply doesn't work. I would expect my opponent to resign eventually, but he's gonna be fighting like a lion. This move actually helps us, because now we can bring the bishop onto c3, and after the rook attacks us, we will play b4, cement the bishop on c3, and even if white actually has no way to steer any counterplay, it's just basically the game is now over. It's official. White can try and protect this pawn, but it's even that is not possible at the moment. So we just activate our rooks on the a file and maybe double them on the second rank. It's just so over. So we take, and now maybe we will end up with more time than we had when we get the advantage. So first of all, as well, we can play rook pawn to d2 and so on, but I think white had enough, seeing that, you know, we have 2 extra pieces, 4 extra pawns in the middle, or 1 extra piece, 4 pawns in the middle that are unstoppable. This is probably like a 4 queens. We can force the trades on a1 as well. We can simply attack the king on the second rank. So we have another win with Phillidor. So Phillidor moves 3-2 to Sicilian Khan, but Sicilian we played only 2 games. So we will see how it goes in Sicilian. But you can see that this Phillidor pawn structure can be pretty strong if you have the right moves on this level, around the 1000 to 1400 level. Maybe this will be a very strong weapon. I suspect that it will be stronger weapon as well on the higher levels, but I cannot play yet on the higher levels due to the very slow glico that Chess.com is giving, and so I will be playing eventually on Lead Chess, but at the moment, as I'm recording with the phone, it's difficult for me to get a connection for the Chessup, as I would have to do it through the phone's app. So apologies if the opponents are a bit weaker, but that's something that will be addressed in the future. Either we will get there by defeating those weaker opponents, but it's so slow on chess.com that's not even funny. Right, so Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this game with the Phillidor setup. That's it's quite simple to remember how your pawn structure could be in those positions. We haven't yet got any opportunity to play a5 and b5 in our games, but those pushes will come as well as I believe sometimes you will be able to see as well the pushes on the queen side. However, sometimes the pawn in Phillidor will stay like this, but the pawn structure will be still pretty similar on the other side of the board. Okay guys, you have a lovely day and I will see you in our next game. Let's turn off the board.